The old man sat by the dumpster behind the diner, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, a folded blanket over his lap, and his wheelchair sinking slightly into the mud. Katie didn't say a word, just handed him a steaming box of leftover meatloaf and lemon pie. He gave her the same small nod he always did, eyes tired but grateful. She didn't know his name, didn't ask. It was just something she did after every shift. No one noticed. No one cared. And honestly, she never expected anyone to. Until one Sunday morning, the quiet hum of her neighborhood was shattered by the roar of engines. A dozen bikers in leather jackets pulled up to her front yard, and the man she'd fed in silence rolled forward, cane in hand, looked her dead in the eyes, and said, "You've been feeding one of ours. Now it's our turn." Katie Torres was a woman people looked through rather than at until they needed something. Quick with refills, sharp with comebacks, and tireless on her feet, she kept the Eagle's Nest Diner running. At 31, she'd made peace with her lot, working double shifts at a roadside diner with sticky booths and a jukebox that hadn't played since Clinton was president. Home was a faded blue house with more problems than rooms, but it was hers, and she fixed what she could between paychecks. Every night after closing, while her co-workers rushed to their cars, Katie performed her own ritual. She'd pack whatever hadn't sold, sometimes meatloaf, sometimes pot roast, always with something sweet, and slip out the back door. There, like clockwork, sat a weathered man in a wheelchair, gray beard reaching his chest, thick coat regardless of season, always with a dog-eared paperback in his lap. He never asked for anything, never told stories, just accepted the food with quiet dignity and a soft, "Thanks, ma'am." What began as impulse evolved into purpose. The boxes grew to include extra napkins, plastic utensils, and notes scrawled on receipt paper. "Saved you the last piece of cherry pie. Stay warm tonight. Hope you like lasagna." One evening, her coworker Diane caught her packing the leftovers. "What if he's just hustling you?" Diane asked, snapping her gum. "You know half these guys fake the veteran thing, right?" Katie tucked a slice of apple pie into the container. "Then I'm out a meatloaf. But if I'm right, then I'm feeding someone who's seen more than we ever will." She didn't need his story, didn't require proof of need. She saw dignity in his silence, and that was enough. What she couldn't see was that her small act of mercy had been noticed, remembered, and the man she thought was alone was anything but forgotten. His name was Franklin James Mercer, though Katie wouldn't learn that for weeks. To her, he was the quiet constant at the end of her shifts, seated in the same shadowed corner, thumbing through a book whose cover she could never quite make out. He accepted her offerings with the same careful nod, as if receiving communion rather than leftovers. Katie's curiosity grew alongside her commitment. She began adding small notes to his containers. "Meatloaf again, sorry. Boss was watching, couldn't get dessert. Save this from the football team, they ordered too much." She never expected replies, but once, pressed between the pages of his book, she glimpsed her notes, preserved like pressed flowers. Another time, she spotted a faded tattoo on his wrist as he reached for the box eagle, globe, and anchor, Marine Corps. She never mentioned it. There were other clues for those willing to see. The military precision of his blanket folds, the way his eyes scanned the alley before relaxing, how he positioned himself with sight lines to both exits. But Katie never pried. Some stories deserve to be told, not extracted. Then came the storm, 3 days of relentless rain that flooded streets and knocked out power. Katie waded through ankle-deep water to reach the diner's back door, a carefully wrapped package of food tucked under her raincoat. The alley was empty. Just puddles reflecting neon and garbage floating like miniature boats. The next night, still empty. And the next. A week passed without a sign of him. "Maybe he moved on," Diane suggested with a shrug. "They do that, you know." Katie nodded, but something felt wrong. After nearly 8 months of clockwork reliability, his absence left a void larger than his silence had ever occupied. "It's not like I knew him," she told herself, scrubbing the grill with more force than necessary. "It's not like he owed me anything." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't about debt. It was about connection, the kind forged in consistent kindness, without expectation of return. What Katie couldn't know was that Frankie hadn't vanished, he'd been found. And the brotherhood he'd once belonged to, the one he'd tried to outrun along with his memories, had never stopped searching for one of their own. Sunday mornings in Katie's neighborhood were typically marked by competing church bells and the distant whine of lawnmowers. This particular morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight painting her peeling porch rails gold as she stepped outside with her chipped mug of coffee. The rumble came first, a distant thunder growing steadily louder. Katie paused mid-sip, watching the road. Then they appeared, a convoy of gleaming motorcycles, chrome catching sunlight like signal mirrors. One by one they rolled onto her street, engines growling in perfect harmony. Leather-clad riders sat tall in their saddles, faces hidden behind visors and beards. They formed a perfect semicircle in front of her house, engines idling before falling silent in unison. Katie stood frozen, one hand gripping the porch railing, wondering if she should retreat inside. Then the lead rider removed his helmet. It was him, the man from behind the diner. But instead of a wheelchair, he stood with the aid of a carved wooden cane. Instead of tattered clothes, he wore a leather vest emblazoned with patches. His gray beard was trimmed, his eyes clear and steady. He looked whole. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice stronger than she remembered. Katie blinked, coffee forgotten in her hand. You can walk?" A small smile creased his weathered face. "On good days, with help." He tapped his cane on the ground. "Bad days, I need the chair, but today's a good day." Another rider stepped forward, taller than the rest, with arms like tree trunks and eyes that had seen more than they told. "This the one, Frankie?" he asked. Frankie nodded. "This is Katie." The big man approached the porch steps. "Name's Hammer, president of Steel Honor MC." He extended a massive hand. "Your friend here says you've been looking out for him." Katie shook his hand automatically, still processing. It wasn't anything special." A woman with silver hair and a leather vest cut in. "Feeding our brother every night for 8 months, without asking for anything? That's something where we come from." "Your brother?" Katie looked between them. "I don't understand." Frankie leaned on his cane, sunlight catching the Marine Corps pin on his vest. "They found me 3 weeks ago, brought me back to the chapter house, got me medical attention I'd been avoiding." "You disappeared," Katie said, accusation mixing with relief. I know what you thought." Frankie interrupted gently. "And I'm sorry, but I needed to get my head straight before I came back. Needed to remember who I was before I became the man by the dumpster." Hammer's voice rumbled like his bike. "Frankie here was one of our founding members. Disappeared after his 3rd tour. We've been looking for him for years." "And while we were looking," said the silver-haired woman, "you were feeding him, keeping him alive. That makes you family in our book." Katie's mind raced to catch up. "But I didn't know." "That's why it matters," Frankie said simply. "You helped when you didn't have to, without knowing who I was or what I might have done." He straightened his stance, pride visible in every line of his body. "You've been feeding one of ours. Now it's our turn." Katie stepped back as the bikers moved toward her yard with military precision. "Wait, what are you doing?" she called, coffee sloshing over the rim of her forgotten mug. The silver-haired woman, who later introduced herself as Raven, winked. "Just wait, honey." At a signal from Hammer, 2 riders yanked back a tarp Katie hadn't even noticed, revealing a mountain of supplies. Lumber stacked neatly by grade, paint cans organized by color, power tools still in their boxes, plumbing fixtures gleaming in the morning sun, and a solid oak front door with beveled glass. "What is all this?" Katie whispered, setting down her mug before she dropped it. Frankie made his way carefully up her porch steps, each one creaking dangerously beneath his weight. "You've been fixing this place one paycheck at a time. I watched you carry home supplies on the bus. Saw you painting after midnight shifts." He gestured to the gathered riders. "We figured it's time someone gave you a hand." Before Katie could respond, the group moved with practiced efficiency. Tarps unfurled over her patchy lawn, ladders extended against peeling siding. Someone started measuring her crooked porch railings, while another began removing the rusted gutters. Inside, they assessed her home with expert eyes: the leaking roof, the temperamental water heater, the window that never quite closed. Each problem was noted, categorized, and assigned to a team. "You don't have to do this," Katie protested weakly, watching as her sagging porch was systematically dismantled. Hammer paused from where he was ripping out rotted floorboards. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we know that. But in our club, we have a saying: debts paid forward are bonds made stronger." For 2 days, the sound of hammers, saws, and occasional good-natured arguments filled her small property. Neighbors peered from windows as the tattooed crew transformed her house. The sagging porch became a solid deck. The patched roof was stripped to the rafters and rebuilt. Inside, her ancient plumbing gave way to copper pipes that didn't groan when she turned on the tap. Katie tried to help, but was gently rebuffed at every turn. "Your job is to rest," Raven told her, pressing a cold drink into her hand. "You've done your shift." By sunset on the second day, Katie stood in her front yard, staring at a house she barely recognized. Fresh paint gleamed in the fading light. New windows reflected the sky. Her porch, now rebuilt with pressure-treated lumber and proper footings, looked solid enough to last decades. As the crew began packing their tools, Frankie approached with a wooden box. "One more thing," he said, opening the lid. Inside lay a hand-carved wooden plaque. Burned into the grain were the words, "Katie Torres, Honorary Sister of Steel." Katie traced the letters with trembling fingers. "Why? Why would you all do this? I just gave you food." Frankie's eyes held hers, all pretense of weakness gone. "You gave me dignity when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You saw me when I was trying not to be seen." He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "That kind of loyalty? That's family. And we don't forget family." The Steel Honor MC left as dramatically as they arrived, a thunder of engines and glinting chrome fading into the distance. But something of them remained in the solid porch steps, the gleaming windows, and the wooden plaque now mounted beside Katie's front door. They returned the following Sunday. Not all of them, just Frankie, Hammer, Raven, and 3 others. They brought donuts and coffee. Katie had made a pot of chili, not knowing what else to offer people who had rebuilt her home. They ate together on her new porch, sharing stories that gradually revealed the tapestry of their lives, veterans mostly, some still battling demons, all finding purpose in their brotherhood. The Sundays became tradition. Sometimes just a few riders would appear, sometimes a dozen. Katie's porch became a gathering place for an unlikely family, united by something stronger than blood. Word spread. A neighbor's son returning from Afghanistan found his way to Katie's porch. Then, a homeless veteran from 3 towns over. Katie never turned anyone away. "Come hungry, leave warmer," became her unspoken motto. The diner noticed too. Customers began leaving extra tips for the Vets Fund. Her boss, grudgingly at first, started setting aside meals rather than discarding them. When Katie's car finally died, a mysteriously rebuilt engine appeared in her driveway with a note: "Oil change every 3,000 miles. No excuses." Frankie still came to the diner sometimes, sitting in a proper booth now instead of by the dumpster. He'd order coffee and leave too large a tip, always with the same quiet nod. Some days he used the wheelchair, other days the cane. But his eyes no longer carried the weight of a man who'd forgotten his worth. One evening, as summer faded into autumn, Katie stood at the edge of her porch, watching Frankie discuss engine repairs with a young veteran fresh from basic training. She glanced at the wooden plaque beside her door, its edges softened by time and touched by countless curious fingers. In that moment, something crystallized in her understanding. You don't need a uniform to serve. Sometimes service looks like leftover meatloaf and a quiet word. Sometimes it's seeing someone that others have trained themselves to overlook. She hadn't just inherited a renovated house from the Steel Honor MC. She'd inherited purpose, a reminder that kindness isn't measured by grandness of gesture, but by consistency of presence. And somewhere along the way, while feeding a stranger in silence, she'd fed a part of herself that had long gone hungry. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the foundation for something stronger than steel, a legacy built on nothing more than the courage to see another human being.